The flash of the camera caught me off guard as I tried to duck behind my cousin at my sister's wedding reception. But it was too late. My Aunt Patricia had already lowered her phone, shaking her head with that familiar look of disappointment I'd grown to expect at family gatherings. "Honestly, Madison," she whispered loud enough for half the table to hear, "maybe you should step out of the group photos. You know how pictures add weight, and we want Rachel's album to look, well, perfect." Little did she know that in 18 months, my face would be plastered across billboards in Times Square, and fashion magazines from Milan to Tokyo would be calling me the breakthrough model of the year. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Growing up in suburban Phoenix, Arizona, I was always the biggest girl in my family. Not just tall, though at 5'9" I towered over most of my relatives, but genuinely larger in every way that seemed to matter to the Morrison clan. My mom, Jennifer, was a petite size 4 who could still fit into her high school cheerleading uniform. My sister Rachel had inherited those same delicate features and bird-like frame. Even my dad, Thomas, despite his dad bod, would pat his stomach and joke about needing to lose just 10 pounds to get back to his college weight. Then there was me. At 16, I was pushing size 14 and growing tired of shopping in the extended sizes section, while Rachel picked out crop tops and skinny jeans from the regular racks. But the real pain wasn't in the clothing sizes or the number on the scale. It was in the way my family treated me, like I was somehow broken, like my body was a problem that needed fixing. The photo incident started early. Family Christmas cards, vacation snapshots, birthday parties. There was always a reason why I should stand in the back, or better yet, be the one taking the pictures instead of being in them. My mom developed an arsenal of gentle suggestions that cut deeper than any direct insult ever could. "Madison, honey, maybe stand behind your sister? You know how the camera angle works better that way." Or, "Why don't you wear something darker, sweetheart? It's more flattering." The worst was when she'd review photos afterward, frowning at her phone screen. "Oh, this one's not very good of you, Mad. Let's just delete this batch and try again." By the time I turned 17, I'd become an expert at making myself invisible. School pictures were torture. I'd spend hours trying on different outfits, practicing poses in my bedroom mirror, only to feel sick with anxiety when the photographer called my name. I became the designated photographer for friend groups, always. Ready with an excuse about wanting to capture the moment rather than be in it. The breaking point came during spring break of my junior year. Our extended family had rented a beach house in San Diego for a week-long reunion. Cousins, aunts, uncles, grandparents, the whole Morrison crew descended on this beautiful oceanfront property for what was supposed to be a celebration of family togetherness. I'd actually been looking forward to the trip. I'd been working with a personal trainer at our local gym for 3 months and had lost about 15 pounds. For the first time in years, I felt somewhat confident in a bathing suit. I'd bought this gorgeous navy one-piece that actually made me feel pretty, and I was ready to enjoy the beach without hiding under layers of cover-ups. The first few days went well. I swam with my younger cousins, played volleyball on the sand, and even joined the family for sunset walks along the water. But everything changed on Thursday when my Uncle Dave announced he wanted to hire a professional photographer to capture the family reunion. "This is probably the last time we'll all be together like this," he said, gesturing around the dinner table where 3 generations of Morrisons were gathered. "Let's do it right. Get some really beautiful photos we can all treasure." I should have seen it coming. The whispered conversations between my mom and Aunt Patricia, the way they kept glancing at me during the planning discussion, the sudden suggestion that maybe we should do multiple groupings instead of one big family photo. When the photographer arrived Friday morning, I was getting ready in my room, carefully applying sunscreen and trying to tame my hair in the coastal humidity. I could hear everyone gathering on the back deck, voices excited and animated as they discussed poses and positioning. I grabbed my sunglasses and headed downstairs, but before I could step outside, my mom intercepted me in the hallway. She had that look on her face, the one that meant she was about to say something that would hurt, but that she believed was for my own good. "Madison, sweetie, we were thinking maybe you could help coordinate things with the photographer. No? Help get everyone organized, make sure the little kids are behaving." "Mom, I want to be in the photos too," I said, though my stomach was already dropping. "Of course, honey. Of course. We'll definitely get some pictures with you. But for the main family portrait, we were thinking it might be better if we kept it to just the couples and the smaller kids. You understand? It's about composition and balance." I stood there in that hallway, listening to my family laughing and arranging themselves outside, and something inside me just cracked. Not broke, cracked. Like a windshield that gets hit by a rock and spreads tiny fractures in every direction, but somehow still holds together. "I understand," I said quietly. But I didn't understand. Not really. What I understood was that my own family saw me as someone who would ruin their perfect picture. What I understood was that my body was so offensive, so problematic, that it couldn't be included in their treasured memories. I spent the next hour playing photographer's assistant, adjusting my little cousin's hair and making sure everyone's shirts were straight, all while staying carefully out of frame. When they finally included me in a few shots, scattered throughout smaller groupings, never in the main family portrait, I smiled and posed like nothing was wrong. That night, I lay in my beach house bedroom listening to everyone review the photos on the photographer's camera, voices full of excitement and approval. "Oh, this one's gorgeous. We definitely need to frame this. Look how beautiful everyone looks." No one mentioned the pictures I was in. They weren't bad pictures. They weren't good pictures. They were invisible pictures, afterthoughts that would probably never make it into anyone's photo albums. I made a decision that night, staring at the ceiling while my sister slept peacefully in the bed next to mine. I was done being invisible. I was done letting other people decide that my body was wrong, that my presence somehow ruined things, that I needed to hide or shrink or apologize for taking up space. I didn't know yet that this decision would lead me to New York City, to casting, calls, to rejection after rejection until one photographer saw something in me that my own family had missed. I didn't know that the same body they wanted to hide from cameras would eventually grace magazine covers around the world. All I knew was that I was tired of being the girl who wasn't worth photographing, and I was ready to do something about it. Senior year arrived with a vengeance. While my classmates were stressing about college applications and prom dates, I was hatching a plan that would have given my parents a heart attack if they'd known the full extent of it. The summer after the beach house incident, I'd gotten a job at Nordstrom in the Scottsdale Fashion Square Mall. It wasn't glamorous. I was folding clothes and reorganizing displays, but it put me in the middle of the fashion world in a way I'd never experienced before. More importantly, it gave me access to clothes that actually fit my body and made me feel confident. My manager, Diane Rodriguez, was this fierce woman in her 40s who'd worked in retail fashion for decades. She had an eye for style that went beyond the cookie-cutter looks my family preferred, and she was the first adult who ever told me I had potential as a model. "You've got the height, the bone structure, and something else," she said one afternoon as I was steaming dresses in the back room. "You photograph well, I can tell." "How can you tell that?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Bone structure doesn't lie, and you move with intention. Not like those girls who are constantly checking themselves in mirrors. You're comfortable in your skin, even if you don't realize it yet." Diane introduced me to her friend Marcus Chen, a photographer who shot for local magazines and did commercial work around Phoenix. Marcus needed models for a plus-size clothing catalog, and Diane had convinced him to let me audition. My first real photo shoot was in a warehouse in Tempe on a scorching Saturday morning in August. I was terrified. I'd never posed for professional photos before, and I kept waiting for Marcus to realize he'd made a mistake, that I wasn't what he was looking for. But something magical happened when those lights turned on. The camera didn't make me want to hide. It made me want to show more. Marcus was patient, encouraging, and he had this way of making me feel like I was collaborating with him rather than just being photographed. "Don't think about how you look," he kept saying. "Think about how you feel. What story are you telling?" The photos from that shoot were revelation. For the first time in my life, I saw myself the way someone else saw me, not as a problem to be hidden, but as someone worth looking at. The clothes looked good on me. I looked good in the clothes. More than good. I looked powerful. Marcus paid me $300 for that shoot, but more importantly, he asked me to work with him again. Then again. By October, I was doing regular catalog work and had built up a portfolio that made me feel like maybe, just maybe, I could make this into something real. The plan I'd been forming all semester crystallized around Thanksgiving. I was going to apply to colleges in New York City, specifically fashion schools that had strong connections to the modeling industry. I'd been researching Parsons, Fit, and Lim College, telling my parents I was interested in fashion merchandising while secretly planning to pursue modeling full-time. Getting into college in New York would give me the perfect excuse to move across the country. Once I was there, I could start going to casting calls, building connections, and really seeing if I had what it took to make it in the fashion industry. But first, I had to survive the holidays. Thanksgiving dinner at my grandparents' house was the usual minefield of family politics and passive-aggressive comments. My cousin Brittany, who'd just started her sophomore year at Arizona State, spent the entire meal talking about her sorority sisters and how they all went to SoulCycle together every morning. "Madison, you should totally come work out with us sometime," she said, cutting into her turkey with surgical precision. "We could get you a guest pass. The instructors are amazing. They'll totally whip you into shape." "I'm actually in pretty good shape," I said, which was true. All those photo shoots had made me more aware of my body in a positive way, and I'd been hitting the gym consistently for months. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. "Oh, I didn't mean it like that," Brittany backtracked, but her tone suggested she absolutely meant it like that. "I just meant, for toning up before prom and stuff. I remember how stressful dress shopping was for you last year." The truth was, I hadn't even thought about prom yet. I was too busy planning my escape route to New York to worry about high school milestones. But Brittany's comment reminded me of something important. My family still saw me as the same insecure girl who'd hidden from cameras and struggled to find dresses that fit. They had no idea who I was becoming. After dinner, while everyone was watching football in the living room, I found myself in the kitchen with my grandmother, Eleanor. She was loading the dishwasher with the methodical precision of someone who'd been hosting family dinners for 50 years. "You seem different, Madison," she said without looking up from the plates. "More confident." "Thanks, Grandma. I saw some of those photos you've been doing. Your mother showed me on her phone. The ones from that clothing catalog." My stomach dropped. I hadn't told my parents about the modeling work, but apparently Marcus had tagged me in some of the photos on Instagram, and my mom had been keeping close tabs on my social media than I'd realized. "You looked beautiful," my grandmother continued. "Professional. Like you belonged there." "Mom wasn't upset?" I asked, bracing myself for the lecture about focusing on school instead of frivolous pursuits. Eleanor finally looked at me, and there was something in her expression I hadn't expected. Pride, maybe, or recognition. "Your mother worries about you. She always has. But sometimes when you worry too much about protecting someone, you forget to see who they really are." It was the closest thing to validation I'd gotten from my family in years, and it came from the person I'd least expected it from. December flew by in a blur of college applications, final exams, and more photo shoots with Marcus. I was getting better at modeling with each session, more comfortable with the camera, more confident in my ability to convey emotion and personality through still images. Marcus introduced me to other photographers in the Phoenix area, and I started building a network of creative professionals who saw me as a legitimate model rather than someone playing dress-up. I was booking regular work, making decent money, and most importantly, I was learning the business side of the industry. "You're outgrowing Phoenix," Marcus told me after a particularly successful shoot for a local boutique. "You've got the skills to make it in bigger markets, but you need to be where the real opportunities are." "New York?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "New York, but not just yet. You need more experience, a stronger portfolio, and connections that can actually open doors for you." That's when he told me about Amanda Foster, a former model-turned-agent who'd moved back to Phoenix after a successful career in New York. She was building a boutique agency focused on diverse talent, and Marcus thought I might be exactly what she was looking for. The meeting with Amanda was scheduled for January 15th, right after winter break. I spent the entire holiday season preparing for it, researching her background, practicing my pitch, and building up the courage to tell my parents that their daughter was about to become a professional model. On New Year's Eve, while everyone else was making resolutions about losing weight or getting organized, I made a different kind of promise to myself. I was going to stop waiting for permission to be who I wanted to be. I was going to stop apologizing for taking up space, for wanting things that seemed impossible, for believing I deserved to be seen. I had no idea that meeting Amanda would change everything, or that within 6 months I'd be walking into casting calls in Manhattan with a confidence I'd never possessed before. I just knew that the girl who'd hidden from cameras at family gatherings was gone, and in her place was someone ready to step directly into the spotlight. The photo shoots in Phoenix had been practice. New York was going to be the real test. Amanda. Foster's office was nothing like I'd expected. Instead of the sleek, intimidating space I'd imagined, it was warm and cluttered, with Polaroid photos covering every inch of the walls and plants growing in mismatched pots along the windowsills. Amanda herself was equally surprising. Petite, probably in her early 30s, with natural gray streaks in her dark hair and the kind of effortless style that only comes from years in the fashion industry. "Marcus sent me your portfolio," she said, flipping through the printed photos I'd brought. "But I'm more interested in what you want to build than what you've already done." For the next hour, Amanda grilled me about my goals, my understanding of the industry, and my willingness to face rejection. She didn't sugarcoat anything about the modeling world, the politics, the pressure, the way agencies could chew up young women and spit them out. "The market is changing," she explained. "Brands are finally realizing that real women come in all sizes, and they want models who can connect with authentic audiences. But that doesn't mean it's easy. You'll face rejection that has nothing to do with your talent and everything to do with outdated industry standards." What sealed the deal wasn't my portfolio. It was my response to her final question. "Why modeling, Madison? You're clearly intelligent. You could pursue anything. Why put yourself through this particular kind of challenge?" I thought about the beach house, about all those years of stepping out of frame, about the way my family had made me feel like my body was something to apologize for. Because I want little girls who look like me to see someone like them in magazines. I want them to know they don't have to make themselves smaller to be beautiful. Amanda smiled for the first time during our meeting. "That's exactly why I think you'll succeed." By March, Amanda had arranged for me to spend the summer in New York, working with photographers in her network and going to casting calls. The plan was to test the waters. If I could book consistent work during those 3 months, she'd help me make the permanent move after graduation. Telling my parents about the New York plan required strategy. I waited until I'd been accepted to FIT, then presented the modeling opportunity as a summer internship that would enhance my fashion merchandising studies. "It's perfect, Mom," I said, spreading brochures across the kitchen table. "I'll be working directly with photographers and fashion brands, learning the business from the inside. Amanda has connections all over the city. This could really help me network for after college." My mom picked up Amanda's business card, studying it like it might reveal hidden dangers. "I don't know, Madison. New York is so expensive, and you've never lived anywhere but Phoenix. What if something goes wrong?" "I've saved up money from the Nordstrom job and the photo shoots. Amanda found me a reasonable sublet in Brooklyn with 2 other girls in the program. And I'll be working the whole time. This isn't just some summer vacation." My dad was more direct with his concerns. "Modeling is a tough business, kiddo. Are you sure you want to put yourself through that kind of scrutiny? People can be cruel, especially in an industry that's all about appearance." His comment stung because I could hear the subtext. He was worried that I couldn't handle the rejection, that I wasn't strong enough for an industry that would judge my body even more harshly than my family had. "I've been handling scrutiny my whole life, Dad," I said quietly. "At least in modeling, I'll be getting paid for it." The conversation went on for weeks, but eventually my persistence wore them down. By April, they'd agreed to let me spend the summer in New York, with the understanding that I'd be back in Phoenix for college in the fall. I graduated from high school in May with a 3.8 GPA and a modeling contract that I kept secret from everyone, except my grandmother Eleanor, who'd somehow become my unexpected ally in the family. "Your mother called me yesterday," she told me during our final coffee date before I left for New York. "She's worried you're making a mistake." "Are you?" Eleanor stirred sugar into her coffee, taking her time with the answer. "I'm worried you're not making a big enough mistake," she said finally. "Sometimes the biggest risk is playing it too safe." New York hit me like a physical force. The heat, the noise, the constant motion of 8 million people trying to get somewhere important. It was overwhelming and exhilarating at the same time. My sublet was a tiny room in a converted warehouse in Williamsburg, shared with 2 other aspiring models: Claire, a 19-year-old from Ohio who was built like a gazelle, and Zoe, a 22-year-old from Atlanta who'd been modeling for 3 years and served as our unofficial guide to the city. "Rule number 1, Zoe announced on my first morning. "Never let them see you sweat. Literally. Always carry blotting papers and breath mints. Rule number 2, every casting is practice for the next casting. You're going to get rejected 90% of the time, and it has nothing to do with whether you're good enough." My first week was a disaster. I got lost on the subway, showed up late to 2 castles, and completely froze during a go-see for a cosmetics campaign. The photographer barely looked at me before saying, "Thank you, next." But Amanda had been right about the market changing. By my 3rd week, I was starting to book smaller jobs, catalog work, e-commerce shoots, a few editorial pieces for online magazines. Nothing glamorous, but I was working consistently and learning something new from every photographer. The breakthrough came in July, during what should have been a routine casting for a fitness brand. The photographer, David Kim, was known for his commercial work, but he was also trying to build a more artistic portfolio. When I walked into his studio in Soho, he was setting up for what looked like a completely different kind of shoot. "I'm working on a personal project," he explained after we'd finished the casting for the fitness brand. "It's about redefining beauty standards, showing women who don't fit traditional model archetypes but who have incredible presence on camera. Would you be interested in collaborating?" The artistic shoot with David was unlike anything I'd experienced. Instead of selling clothes or products, we were creating images that told stories about confidence, strength, and self-acceptance. David had this gift for capturing not just how people looked, but who they were. "You have something special," he told me as we wrapped the session. "You're not trying to be anyone else. You're completely yourself in front of the camera. That's rarer than you might think." 3 weeks later, David called with news that would change everything. One of the photos from our shoot caught the attention of an editor at Vogue International, he said, his voice barely containing excitement. They want to meet with you about a feature they're planning on body positivity in fashion. Vogue International wasn't American Vogue. It was the global edition that focused on international fashion trends and social movements. But it was still, Vogue, still one of the most influential fashion magazines in the world. The meeting was scheduled for August 15th, just 2 weeks before I was supposed to return to Phoenix for college. As I sat in the Vogue offices looking out at the Manhattan skyline, I realized I was at a crossroads that would determine the rest of my life. The editor, Sarah Chen, was everything I'd imagined a Vogue editor would be: impeccably dressed, intimidatingly smart, and completely direct about what she wanted. "We're planning a feature on models who are changing the conversation about beauty standards," she said, studying the photos David had sent. "But we're not interested in inspiration porn or feel-good fluff. We want to showcase women who are genuinely disrupting the industry, who have something real to say." She leaned forward, her eyes sharp with interest. "The question is, what do you have to say, Madison Morrison?" Sarah Chen's question hung in the air like a challenge. What did I have to say? I thought about all the conversations I'd had with other models over the past few months, the stories they'd shared about being told they were almost right for campaigns, about agencies that promised to represent them, but never actually submitted them for jobs. I think the fashion industry talks about inclusion, but it's still operating from a place of scarcity, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Like there's only room for 1 or 2 models who don't fit the traditional mold, so we're all competing for the same token spots instead of expanding what's possible. Sarah nodded, making notes on her tablet. Go on. I want to normalize the idea that beauty comes in different packages, not as a statement or a movement, but just as reality. The same way we don't think twice about having brunette models and blonde models on the same page. The conversation that followed was intense. Sarah wanted to know about my background, my experience with rejection, my plans for the future. She was particularly interested in my family's reaction to my modeling career, though I kept the details vague. Family dynamics can be complicated when you're pursuing something they don't understand, I said diplomatically. Would you be willing to discuss that in the feature? The personal cost of breaking barriers? I hesitated. Opening up about my family's treatment would mean exposing them publicly, potentially damaging relationships that were already fragile. But it would also mean telling a story that might help other young women who were facing similar challenges. I'd consider it, I said finally. Sarah smiled. The shoot will be in September. We're thinking of positioning this as a cover story for the December International issue, the one that goes out globally and sets trends for the following year. A cover story for Vogue International. I managed to keep my expression neutral, but inside I was screaming. There's one thing you should know, Sarah continued. This feature will generate significant attention. Your life will change overnight. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny? I thought about my parents, who still believed I was coming home in 2 weeks to start college. I thought about my sister's wedding photos, where I'd been carefully positioned in the back row. I thought about every family gathering where I'd been made to feel like my presence was something to manage rather than celebrate. I'm ready, I said. Walking out of the Vogue offices, I felt like I was floating 6 inches above the sidewalk. But the euphoria was quickly replaced by panic, as I realized what this meant for the carefully constructed story I'd told my parents about spending the summer in New York. I called Amanda first, catching her between meetings at her office. Sarah Chen called me 10 minutes ago, Amanda said before I could even explain why I was calling. Madison, do you understand what just happened? This is the kind of opportunity that launches careers. I know, but Amanda, I'm supposed to go home next week. My parents think I'm starting college. You're not starting college, Amanda said firmly. You're starting your career. This is your moment, Madison. You can't walk away from it to take freshman composition classes. That night, I called my parents. My mom answered on the second ring, her voice bright with excitement. Madison, how was the meeting with that magazine? Dad and I were just talking about helping you pack for the drive home. Mom, I need to tell you something. The meeting went really well. Actually, it went better than I expected. I explained about the Vogue feature, the cover story, and the opportunity to work with some of the most respected photographers in the industry. I tried to present it as a temporary delay, just a few more months in New York to capitalize on this break. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I wondered if we'd been disconnected. Madison, my mom said finally, you're 18 years old. You can't base your entire future on one magazine shoot. It's not just one shoot, Mom. It's Vogue International. This could open doors I never even imagined. And what happens when this is over? When you're 25 and haven't finished college, haven't you built any real skills? Modeling isn't a career, sweetheart. It's a phase. The conversation deteriorated from there. My dad got on the phone, my mom started crying, and everyone was talking at once. The call ended with my parents giving me an ultimatum. Come home and start college as planned, or figure out how to support myself without their help. I hung up and stared at my phone for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. In the span of 12 hours, I'd been offered the opportunity of a lifetime and essentially disowned by my family. Zoe found me sitting on our fire escape at midnight, still in the dress I'd worn to the Vogue meeting. Rough call home? She asked, settling beside me with 2 cups of tea. They want me to choose between my family and my career. That sucks, Zoe said bluntly. But it's not really a choice, is it? You know what you have to do. Do I? What if they're right? What if I'm throwing away my future for something that might not work out? Zoe was quiet for a moment, looking out at the Manhattan skyline twinkling in the distance. When I first moved here, my grandmother told me something that stuck with me. She said, "The only way to guarantee failure is to not try at all. Your parents are scared because they love you and they want you to be safe. But safe isn't always the same thing as happy." The next morning, I called Amanda and told her I was staying in New York. Then I called FIT and deferred my enrollment for a year. Finally, I called my parents and told them I wouldn't be coming. Home as planned. I understand you're disappointed, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But I need to see where this leads. I'll always regret it if I don't try. My mom's response was colder than I'd expected. Well, Madison, I hope it works out for you. But don't expect us to pick up the pieces when it doesn't. The Vogue shoot was scheduled for September 20th at a studio in Chelsea. Sarah had assembled an incredible team. David Kim was shooting, with styling by one of fashion's most respected creative directors, and hair and makeup by artists who regularly worked with A-list celebrities. But the week leading up to the shoot was the hardest of my life. My parents weren't returning my calls. My sister had sent me a text saying she was disappointed in my choices, and I was surviving on ramen noodles and the occasional catalog booking. I almost backed out 3 times. The pressure felt enormous, not just to look good, but to represent something bigger than myself. I was carrying the hopes of every girl who'd ever been told she was too big, too different, too much. The morning of the shoot, I woke up with a panic attack. My hands were shaking, my heart was racing, and I couldn't catch my breath. Claire found me hyperventilating in our tiny bathroom. Hey, she said, kneeling beside me. Look at me. This is just fear talking. You've been preparing for this your whole life, even when you didn't know it. She was right. Every time I'd been excluded from a family photo, every time I'd been told to stand in the back, every time I'd been made to feel like my body was something to hide. All of it had been preparing me for this moment. I arrived at the studio with 30 minutes to spare. The space was enormous, with floor-to-ceiling windows and elaborate lighting setups that looked like something from a movie. David greeted me with a hug and introduced me to the rest of the team. "Today is about capturing who you are," he said as the hair and makeup artists began their work. "Not who you think you should be, not who anyone else wants you to be. Just Madison." As I sat in the makeup chair, watching my reflection transform under the skilled hands of the makeup artist, I felt something shift inside me. The girl who had hidden from cameras was gone completely. In her place was someone ready to be seen by the entire world. The Vogue shoot lasted 8 hours, but it felt like 8 minutes. Everything clicked: the lighting, the styling, the energy in the room. David directed me through dozens of poses and outfit changes, but more than that, he captured something I'd never seen in myself before: genuine confidence. "That's it," he kept saying as the camera clicked. "That's the shot." The styling was unlike anything I'd ever worn. Avant-garde pieces from emerging designers mixed with classic couture, each outfit telling a different story about modern femininity. The creative director, Marcus Williams, had a vision that went beyond just showcasing clothes. "We're not selling fashion," he explained during one of the outfit changes. "We're selling possibilities. The idea that beauty has no size limit, no rules, no boundaries." When Sarah Chen arrived halfway through the shoot to check on progress, I could see the excitement in her eyes as she reviewed the images on David's camera. "These are extraordinary," she murmured, scrolling through shot after shot. "Madison, you're a natural." But the real magic happened during the final setup. David had arranged for a simple portrait, just me, dramatic lighting, and minimal makeup. No elaborate styling, no props, just pure editorial sophistication. "I want you to think about the girl you were 2 years ago," David said as he adjusted his camera settings. "Then I want you to think about who you're becoming. Show me both of those people in one frame." Something in his words unlocked something deep inside me. As the camera clicked, I wasn't thinking about poses or angles. I was thinking about that 16-year-old girl hiding behind her cousin at Rachel's wedding. I was thinking about standing in the hallway of that beach house, being told I would ruin the perfect family photo. I was thinking about every moment I'd been made to feel like I was too much, too big, too visible. But I was also thinking about the girl who'd had the courage to move to New York with nothing but a dream and a suitcase. The girl who'd walked into casting calls even when her hands were shaking. The girl who'd chosen her future over her family's approval. "Perfect," David whispered, and I knew he'd captured something special. The weeks that followed were a strange mix of anticipation and normalcy. I continued booking smaller jobs, sharing my tiny Brooklyn apartment with Claire and Zoe, living on Subway sandwiches and big dreams. But underneath it all was the knowledge that something huge was coming. Sarah had warned me that the feature wouldn't publish until December, but that advance copies would start circulating in the industry by November. She'd also arranged for the cover image to be released online a week before the print edition hit newsstands, which would generate buzz and set up interviews with major media outlets. I tried to prepare myself for the attention, but nothing could have prepared me for what actually happened. The cover image went live on Vogue International's Instagram at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in November. Within 6 hours, it had been shared by celebrities, fashion editors, and body positivity advocates around the world. By the end of the day, it had over 2 million likes and had been featured on every major entertainment news website. The photo was stunning. I was wearing a flowing black dress against a stark white background, my hair swept back, looking directly into the camera with an expression that was both vulnerable and powerful. The headline read, "The New Face of Fashion: How Madison Morrison is Redefining Beauty Standards." My phone exploded. Interview requests from major networks, collaboration offers from brands I'd only dreamed of working with, messages from girls around the world saying the cover had made them feel seen for the first time. But the message that mattered most came from an unexpected source. "Madison, My grandmother Eleanor's voice sounded frail on the voicemail. "I just saw your magazine cover on the internet. Your cousin showed me on her computer. I wanted you to know that I'm proud of you. You look beautiful, sweetheart. Like, you belong exactly where you are." The media interviews were intense. Everyone wanted to know about my journey, my family, my plans for the future. I tried to be honest without being bitter, focusing on the positive changes happening in the fashion industry rather than dwelling on the personal costs of getting there. But during a live interview with Good Morning America, the host asked the question I'd been dreading. "Madison, your family hasn't been publicly supportive of your modeling career. How has that affected you personally?" I took a breath, looking directly into the camera, knowing that millions of people were watching, including my parents. "Family. Relationships are complicated," I said carefully. "My parents love me, and they were trying to protect me from an industry they saw as potentially harmful. I understand their concerns, even if I disagree with their approach. I hope that seeing the positive impact this career has allowed me to have might help them understand why I needed to pursue it." It was diplomatic, but it was also true. I wasn't angry at my family anymore. I was sad for them. Sad that they were missing out on sharing this incredible experience with me because they couldn't see past their own fears and prejudices. The December issue officially hit newsstands on November 28th, and the response was immediate and overwhelming. Fashion Week invitations started pouring in. Major brands reached out about campaigns. I was invited to speak at conferences about body positivity and representation in the media. But the moment that truly changed everything happened 3 weeks. After the cover hit newsstands, I was in my apartment reviewing contracts with Amanda when my phone rang. The caller ID showed my sister Rachel's name, the first time she'd called since I'd told my parents I wasn't coming home for college. "Madison?" Her voice was quiet, uncertain. "Rachel, hi. I saw your magazine cover and the interviews and I wanted to apologize. I wasn't expecting that." "For what?" "For all of it. For the wedding photos. For never standing up for you at family dinners. For letting everyone treat you like you were the problem when really we were just scared of anyone who was different from us." She was crying now, and so was I. "I have a daughter now," she continued. "Emma's only 6 months old, but I keep thinking about what I want to teach her about beauty and confidence and taking up space in the world. And I realized I want to teach her to be like you." That conversation lasted 2 hours. Rachel told me about the responses she'd been getting from friends who'd seen the Vogue feature, about conversations with her husband about raising Emma to be confident in her own skin, about how proud she was that her sister was on magazine covers around the world. "Mom and Dad are proud too," she said finally. "They're just too stubborn to admit they were wrong." As if the universe was listening to our conversation, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from my mom, the first direct communication I'd had from her since our fight in August. "Saw you on the Today Show this morning. You handled yourself with grace and dignity. We're working on understanding. Love you." It wasn't an apology, exactly, but it was a start. 6 months later, I was walking the runway at Paris Fashion Week for a major designer's spring collection. As I reached the end of the catwalk and struck my final pose, the audience erupted in applause. In the front row, I spotted Sarah Chen, Amanda, and David, the team that had believed in me when I barely believed in myself. But in the third row, in seats I'd purchased myself, sat my parents and Rachel, holding 6-month-old Emma, and looking at me with expressions I'd waited my whole life to see. Pure, uncomplicated pride. After the show, as reporters swarmed around me asking about future projects and upcoming campaigns, my mom managed to catch my eye through the crowd. She mouthed 2 words that made all the struggle, all the rejection, all the lonely nights in Brooklyn worth it. "You're beautiful." Not, "You look beautiful," or "You photograph well." Just, "You're beautiful." Present tense. As I was. As I'd always been. The little girl who'd been told she was too big for family photos had just walked the most prestigious runway in the world. And finally, for the first time in her life, her family was watching from the front row instead of asking her to step aside. The months following Paris Fashion Week felt like living in someone else's life. My calendar was booked solid with shoots, campaigns, and appearances that would have seemed impossible just a year earlier. But success, in the fashion industry I was learning, came with complications I hadn't anticipated. The first challenge hit me during a campaign shoot for a luxury skincare brand in February. I'd been hired as part of their Real Beauty initiative, but when I arrived at the Manhattan studio, the creative director took one look at me and immediately started whispering to his assistants. "Madison, darling," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "we're going to need you to lose about 15 pounds before we can proceed. The client has some concerns about brand alignment." I stood there in my robe, having already been through 2 hours of hair and makeup, processing what he'd just said. This was exactly the kind of situation Amanda had warned me about. Brands that wanted the publicity of hiring a diverse model, but weren't actually committed to changing their standards. "The contract didn't mention weight requirements," I said calmly. "Oh, it's just a minor adjustment. Very standard in the industry. We can reschedule for next month. Gives you plenty of time to get camera ready." The old Madison might have apologized, might have agreed to lose the weight, might have internalized this as confirmation that she wasn't really good enough. But the new Madison had learned something valuable over the past year. My worth wasn't negotiable. "I'm camera ready now," I said, untying my robe to reveal the flowing white dress they'd selected for the shoot. "If that doesn't work for your client, then perhaps this isn't the right partnership." The creative director's expression shifted from condescending to genuinely surprised. He'd clearly expected me to comply without question. "Well, I suppose we could try a few test shots." "No," I said firmly. "Either you want to work with me as I am, or you don't. There's no middle ground here." I walked out of that studio with my head held high, even though I knew it meant losing a significant paycheck. Amanda was waiting in the car outside, having sensed trouble when the shoot ran longer than expected without any photos being posted to social media. "How bad was it?" she asked as I slid into the passenger seat. "Bad enough that I fired them instead of letting them fire me." Amanda grinned. "That's my girl. You know what this means, though? You're officially threatening enough to make people uncomfortable. That's when you know you're changing things." She was right. Within a week, 3 other major brands had reached out, specifically mentioning that they'd heard about the skincare incident and wanted to work with someone who wouldn't compromise their values for a paycheck. But the real validation came from an unexpected source. David Kim called me on a Thursday evening while I was reviewing contracts in my new apartment. A 1-bedroom in Manhattan that I could actually afford thanks to the steady stream of bookings. "Madison, you need to see this," he said without preamble. "Check your email, now." The message was from a teenage girl named Sophie Chen in Portland, Oregon. She'd attached a photo of herself, a beautiful Asian American girl who was probably a size 16 standing confidently in a prom dress with the biggest smile I'd ever seen. "Dear Madison," the email read, "I wanted you to know that seeing your Vogue cover changed my life. For the first time, I didn't hate the way I looked in photos. I actually asked my mom to take pictures of me in my prom dress because I wanted to remember feeling this beautiful. Thank you for showing me that I don't have to wait until I'm thinner to be worth photographing." I sat in my apartment reading that email over and over, crying in the way you cry when something is so right it hurts. This was why I'd walked away from college. This was why I'd risked everything in a dream that seemed impossible. Not for magazine, covers, or Fashion Week shows, but for teenage girls like Sophie who needed to see someone like them taking up space and owning it completely. The impact was becoming impossible to ignore. My Instagram following had grown to over 3 million, and the comments section had become a gathering place for women sharing their own stories about body image, family pressure, and learning to love themselves. Fashion magazines were featuring more diverse models in their editorials. Casting directors were specifically requesting Madison Morrison types for campaigns. But perhaps the most meaningful change was happening within my own family. My parents had started therapy, both individual and couples counseling, to work through what my mom called our issues with accepting Madison's choices. It was my grandmother Eleanor who'd suggested it, apparently giving them a lecture about missing out on their daughter's success because of their own insecurities. We realized we were more concerned with what other people thought about our family than we were with what was actually best for you, my mom explained during one of our weekly phone calls. That's not the kind of parents we want to be. My dad was more direct about his regrets. I spent so much time worrying about protecting you from rejection that I became the person rejecting you, he said during a visit to New York in March. I'm sorry, kiddo. I'm proud of what you've built, and I'm proud of who you've become. The healing wasn't instant or complete. There were still awkward moments, still conversations where old patterns emerged, but we were trying, and that felt like enough for now. Rachel, meanwhile, had become one of my biggest advocates. She'd started a blog called Raising Emma Right, documenting her journey as a new mother trying to model body positivity and self-acceptance for her daughter. She frequently featured my magazine covers and campaigns, writing about what she wanted Emma to learn from her Aunt Madison. I want Emma to grow up knowing that her worth isn't determined by her dress size or whether she fits into other people's expectations, she wrote in one post that went viral. I want her to know that the most beautiful thing about a person is their confidence in being exactly who they are. The professional opportunities kept expanding in ways I'd never imagined. In April, I was invited to speak at the United Nations about body image and mental health among young women globally. In May, I launched a collaboration with a major retailer to create a clothing line designed for women size 12 and up, with the tagline, Unapologetically You. But the project I was most excited about was still in development. Working with David Kim and a team of writers and producers, we were creating a documentary about the fashion industry's relationship with body diversity. The film would follow several models, including me, as we navigated an industry in transition, showing both the progress being made and the work still to be done. The most challenging part of the documentary was deciding how much of my family's story to include. The producers wanted to focus heavily on the rejection I'd faced at home, positioning it as a dramatic arc of overcoming adversity. But I was reluctant to exploit my family's growth for entertainment value. The story isn't about them being villains, I explained during a production meeting in June. It's about how families can get stuck in patterns that hurt the people they love most, and how those patterns can change when people are willing to do the work. We found a middle ground. The documentary would include interviews with my parents about their journey, but it would focus on their growth and healing rather than dwelling on past mistakes. My mom, surprisingly, was enthusiastic about participating. If sharing our story helps other families avoid the mistakes we made, then it's worth being vulnerable, she said. The summer brought Milan Fashion Week, where I walked for 4 different designers and was featured in a major editorial spread for Italian Vogue. But the highlight wasn't professional. It was personal. My parents, Rachel and baby Emma, all flew to Milan to watch me work. Seeing them in the front row at shows, taking photos with their phones like proud tourists, was surreal in the best possible way. Emma, now almost 2 years old, kept pointing at the billboards featuring my campaigns around the city and saying, "Aunt Maddie," in her tiny voice. She's going to grow up thinking it's completely normal for her family members to be on magazine covers. Rachel laughed as we walked through the historic streets of Milan between shows. Maybe that's not a bad thing, I replied. The documentary premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival in September, exactly 2 years after that first Vogue shoot. The response was overwhelming: standing ovations, distribution deals, and most importantly, conversations. The film sparked discussions about beauty standards, family dynamics, and the responsibility that media companies have in shaping how young people see themselves. But the moment that mattered most to me happened during the Q&A session after the B screening. A young woman in the audience stood up, her voice shaking as she spoke. "I'm 17, and I've been hiding from cameras my whole life because my family always made comments about my weight in photos. After seeing your documentary, I've decided to audition for my school's theater program, even though I know they'll probably want headshots. I just wanted to say thank you for showing me that I don't have to wait until I'm different to start living my life." As the applause filled the theater, I caught my mom's eye in the audience. She was crying, but she was also smiling with a pride that looked completely different from the worried concern I'd grown up with. Later that night, at the after party, Sarah Chen from Vogue International pulled me aside. "Madison, I have a proposition for you," she said. "We're launching a new initiative focused on mental health and body image among young women. We want someone to lead it who understands both the industry and the impact. Interested?" It was the kind of opportunity that would have seemed impossible 3 years earlier when I was hiding behind my cousin at my sister's wedding. Now it felt like the natural next step in a journey that had taught me the difference between being seen and being truly visible. Standing on the rooftop terrace of the party venue, looking out at the Manhattan skyline that had once seemed so intimidating, I thought about that 17-year-old girl in the audience, about Sophie Chen in Portland with her prom dress photos, about Emma, who would grow up in a world where seeing diverse bodies in the media was normal rather than revolutionary. The fashion industry still had a long way to go. There were still creative directors who wanted me to lose weight, still brands that hired me for publicity rather than genuine commitment to change. But the conversations were happening. The standards were shifting, and young women were growing up with different examples of what beauty could look like. My phone buzzed with a text from my grandmother, Eleanor. "Saw the documentary reviews online. Your grandfather would have been so proud. You're changing the world, one photo at a time." She was right, though not in the way I'd originally imagined. I'd thought success would mean proving my family wrong, showing them that I could be beautiful and valuable despite their doubts. But real success had turned out to be something different entirely, helping them see that their doubts were never about me. They were about a world that had taught them to see beauty in only one way, and now we were all learning to see differently. 3 years had passed since I'd walked out of that skincare campaign, and the fashion industry looked dramatically different from where I was sitting now. My corner office at Vogue International overlooked Bryant Park, where Fashion Week tents were being assembled for the spring shows. As the newly appointed director of inclusive media initiatives, I had a bird's-eye view of an industry in the middle of a seismic shift. The numbers told the story better than any magazine spread could. In 2018, models size 12 and above had appeared in less than 3% of major fashion campaigns. This year, that number was approaching 25%. Casting directors who'd once requested traditional model types only were now specifically seeking diverse talent. The change wasn't just cosmetic, it was fundamental. But the real transformation was happening in places like my inbox, which received dozens of messages daily from young women around the world sharing their stories. Like Priya Sharma from Mumbai, who'd started her own modeling agency specifically for South Asian women who didn't fit Western beauty standards. Or Maria Santos from São Paulo, who'd used her platform as a plus-size model to advocate for better healthcare for larger-bodied women in Brazil. The ripple effects reached far beyond fashion. Universities were studying the Morrison effect, the measurable increase in body positivity and self-esteem among teenage girls that correlated with increased representation in the media. Therapists reported that their young female clients were developing healthier relationships with their bodies. Parents were having different conversations with their daughters about beauty and self-worth. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Amanda, calling from Los Angeles, where she was now running the West Coast office of her agency. "Madison, you need to sit down for this," she said, her voice barely containing excitement. "I'm already sitting." Time Magazine, Person of the Year shortlist. You're on it. I nearly dropped the phone. That's not possible. Oh, it's possible. The citation mentions your work in reshaping beauty standards and your impact on mental health among young women globally. Madison, do you understand what this means? I understood it meant that a girl from Phoenix, who'd been told she was too big for family photos, was now being recognized as one of the most influential people in the world. It felt surreal, like something that was happening to someone else. That Time magazine photo shoot was scheduled for December, just before the official announcement. But before that, I had a more personal milestone to navigate. Thanksgiving dinner with my family for the first time in 4 years. The dynamics had shifted so completely that it felt like visiting strangers who happened to share my DNA. My parents' house in Phoenix was decorated with framed magazine covers featuring my campaigns, and my mom had actually hired a photographer to document our family dinner, a woman named Jessica who specialized in what she called authentic family portraits. I want Emma to have photos of all of us together, Rachel explained as Jessica set up her equipment in the living room. Real photos, where everyone looks happy and comfortable and like they actually want to be there. Emma, now 4 years old, had grown into a confident little girl who seemed completely unbothered by cameras. She posed naturally, laughed genuinely, and when Jessica asked her to stand next to her Aunt Madison for a photo, she grabbed my hand without hesitation and grinned at the camera like she owned the world. "Aunt Maddie's famous," she announced to Jessica with the matter-of-fact tone that only small children can manage. "She's on magazines and billboards and everything." "Is that right?" Jessica asked, playing along. "Yep. And Mommy says when I grow up I can be famous too if I want, or I can be anything else because girls can do anything." I caught Rachel's eye over Emma's head, and we shared a look that said everything. This was what we'd been working toward, raising a little girl who saw possibility instead of limitations, who understood that her worth wasn't conditional on fitting into other people's expectations. The Thanksgiving photos were everything our family pictures had never been before. Natural, joyful, inclusive. Everyone was looking at the camera with genuine smiles, and nobody was positioned in the back or asked to step aside. When Jessica showed us the images on her camera's LCD screen, my mom started crying. "These are beautiful," she whispered. "We all look so happy." "We are happy, Mom," I said, putting my arm around her. It just took us a while to figure out how to show it. That evening, after Emma had gone to bed and the dishes were cleared, my family gathered in the living room for what had become our new tradition, looking through the past year's magazines and campaigns together. My dad had become surprisingly good at understanding fashion photography, offering commentary on lighting and composition like he'd been studying it for years. "This one's my favorite," he said, pointing to a spread I'd done for Harper's Bazaar where I was photographed in a series of power suits, looking directly into the camera with an expression that was both challenging and inviting. "You look like someone who could run the world." "Maybe that's because I'm starting to believe I could," I replied. "You already are," my mom said quietly, "just not in the way any of us expected." The conversation that followed was one of the most honest we'd ever had as a family. My parents talked about their own struggles with body image, about the pressure they'd felt to have children who fit certain standards, about the fear that had driven so many of their decisions over the years. "We were terrified that the world would hurt you the way it had hurt us," my mom explained, "so we tried to prepare you for that hurt by controlling how you presented yourself. We thought we were protecting you, but we were actually becoming part of the problem." "The irony," my dad added, "is that you ended up changing the world instead of letting it change you. You did exactly what we were afraid you couldn't do. You proved that our fears were wrong." The Time magazine feature was published in December, and the response was unlike anything I'd experienced before. The article, titled "The Model Who Changed Everything," traced my journey from that first Vogue cover to my current role advocating for systemic change in media representation. but it also examined the broader cultural shift that my story had helped catalyze. Morrison's impact extends far beyond fashion, the article read. She has fundamentally altered how an entire generation of young women sees themselves and their possibilities. In an era where body dysmorphia and eating disorders among teenagers have reached crisis levels, her visibility and advocacy have provided a counter-narrative that emphasizes self-acceptance over self-improvement. The magazine hit newsstands on a Tuesday, and by Wednesday morning I was being invited to appear on every major news program in the country. The attention was overwhelming but also energizing. Each interview was an opportunity to reach more young women who might need to hear that they were enough, exactly as they were. The most meaningful interview came from an unexpected source. Emma, now in pre-K, had been assigned a project about community helpers, and she'd chosen to interview me about my job for her presentation. "Aunt Maddie," she said, holding a toy microphone while my sister filmed on her phone, "what do you do for work?" "I help people understand that beauty comes in lots of different ways," I explained, sitting cross-legged on the floor of her bedroom. "And I take pictures for magazines to show everyone that all kinds of people can be models." "Why is that important?" The question was so pure, so direct, that it cut through all the complex explanations I'd given to journalists and industry executives. "Because when little girls see people who look like them in magazines and on TV, they learn that they matter too, that they don't have to change themselves to be valuable." "Do I matter?" Emma asked. "You matter so much," I said, pulling her into a hug. "Just exactly the way you are." When Rachel posted the video to her blog, it went viral within hours. The image of me sitting on a kid's bedroom floor, explaining body positivity to a 4-year-old in language she could understand, resonated with parents around the world. Comments poured in from mothers and fathers saying it had helped them have conversations with their own children about self-worth and acceptance. Spring brought New York Fashion Week, and this year I wasn't just walking in shows, I was helping to organize them. Working with the Council of Fashion Designers of America, I'd helped establish new guidelines for model health and diversity that were being adopted by major fashion weeks worldwide. The difference was visible everywhere. Runways that would have featured exclusively size 0 models just 5 years earlier now showcased women of all sizes, ages, and ethnicities. Backstage, the energy felt different too. More collaborative, less competitive, more focused on celebrating individuality than conforming to impossible standards. But the moment that truly brought everything full circle happened during a show for a young designer named Alex Thompson, who'd built her entire brand around the concept of clothes for real bodies. As I walked down the runway in one of her designs, a flowing dress that made me feel both powerful and feminine, I spotted someone in the front row who made me stumble slightly in my stride. My high school guidance counselor, Mrs. Patterson, was sitting in the second row, wearing a press badge and taking notes. After the show, she found me backstage. "Madison Morrison," she said with a huge smile. "I can't believe it's really you." "Mrs. Patterson, what are you doing here?" "I'm writing an article for our school district newsletter about former students who are making an impact in their fields. But honestly, I had to see this for myself." "Do you remember that conversation we had in my office your senior year?" I did remember. She'd asked me about my plans after graduation, and I'd given her some vague answer about studying fashion merchandising while secretly planning to pursue modeling. "You said you wanted to change how people thought about beauty," she continued. "I thought it was a nice sentiment, but I never imagined you'd actually do it on this scale." "Did you think I was being unrealistic?" "I thought you were being brave," she said. "But I didn't think the world was ready to change. I'm glad I was wrong about that part." As Fashion Week wound down, I found myself reflecting on how far we'd all come, not just me, but my family, the industry, and the countless young women who'd been inspired to see themselves differently. The girl who'd hidden from cameras had not only learned to love being photographed, but had helped change what kinds of people were considered worthy of being photographed in the first place. The final event of Fashion Week was a party celebrating emerging designers, and as I mingled with models, photographers, and industry executives, I realized that the conversation had fundamentally shifted. People weren't talking about diversity as a trend or a marketing strategy anymore. They were talking about it as simply the way things should be. Late that night, I received a message that made me stop everything I was doing. It was from Sophie Chen, the girl from Portland who'd emailed me years earlier about her prom photos. She was now in college, studying photography, and had just landed an internship with a major fashion magazine. "Madison," her message read, "I wanted you to know that I just got hired as a photo assistant at Elle. In my interview, they specifically mentioned that they were looking for people who understood the importance of inclusive representation in fashion photography. I told them that you had taught me that everyone deserves to be photographed beautifully, and that's become my mission as a photographer. Thank you for showing me that the world could change and that I could be part of changing it." I sat in my apartment, reading that message and thinking about the ripple effects of change. Sophie would go on to photograph other young women who needed to see themselves represented. Those women would inspire others. The cycle would continue, expanding outward in ways I could never have imagined when I was 17 and hiding behind my cousin at my sister's wedding. My phone buzzed with a text from my mom. "Saw the Fashion Week coverage on the news. You looked radiant in every photo. Dad and I are flying to New York next week for the documentary premiere. Can't wait to celebrate with you." 5 years ago, my mother had asked me to step out of family photos because she thought I would ruin the composition. Tonight, she was traveling across the country specifically to be photographed with me at a red carpet event. The transformation was complete, but the work was far from over. There were still battles to fight, still young women who needed to see themselves reflected in the media, still families who needed to learn new ways of seeing beauty. But for the first time since this journey began, I felt like the foundation had been laid for lasting change. As I got ready for bed, I caught sight of myself in the full-length mirror in my bedroom, the same mirror where I'd practiced poses. As an insecure teenager, trying to find angles that made me look smaller. Now I stood in front of it without sucking in my stomach or adjusting my posture. I looked exactly like myself, and for the first time in my life, that felt like exactly enough. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new young women who needed to learn that they were worthy of being seen. But tonight, I was simply Madison Morrison, the girl who'd been told she was too big for photos and had responded by changing the entire conversation about who deserved to be photographed. The best part was knowing that somewhere in Portland, or Phoenix, or Mumbai, or São Paulo, there was a teenage girl looking in her mirror and seeing possibility instead of problems. And that made every difficult moment of this journey worth it. But the universe wasn't done surprising me yet. 3 weeks after Fashion Week, I received a call that would reshape everything I thought I knew about my impact on the world. "Madison, this is Dr. Elena Rodriguez from the National Institute of Mental Health," the voice on the other end said. "We've been conducting a 5-year longitudinal study on body image and self-esteem among adolescent girls, and we have some remarkable findings we'd like to share with you." The study had tracked 10,000 girls aged 13 to 18 across multiple countries, measuring their self-perception, body satisfaction, and mental health indicators before and after what researchers were calling the Morrison phenomenon, the period of increased diverse representation in media that had accelerated following my Vogue cover. "The results are unprecedented," Dr. Rodriguez explained during our video call the following week. "We've seen a 37% decrease in reported body dissatisfaction among participants, a 42% reduction in disordered eating behaviors, and most significantly, a 51% increase in self-reported confidence levels," she pulled up charts and graphs on her screen, showing trend lines that painted a picture of an entire generation learning to see themselves differently. What's particularly interesting is that the improvements aren't limited to girls who share your body type, she continued. The benefits extend across all demographics. It appears that seeing authentic diversity in the media creates a positive feedback loop that benefits everyone. The implications were staggering. The work we'd been doing wasn't just about fashion or representation. It was literally improving the mental health of young people around the world. We'd like to invite you to present these findings at the International Conference on Adolescent Mental Health next month, Dr. Rodriguez said. Your voice, combined with this data, could influence policy decisions about media representation globally. Standing in front of 300 mental health professionals, researchers, and policymakers at the conference in Geneva was both terrifying and exhilarating. I wasn't just a model anymore. I was becoming a researcher, an advocate, a voice for systemic change that extended far beyond the fashion industry. When I first stepped in front of a camera, I thought I was just trying to make a living, I told the audience. I had no idea I was participating in a public health intervention. The presentation sparked conversations that continued long after the conference ended. Governments began considering regulations around media representation. Medical schools started incorporating discussions about media influence into their curricula. The World Health Organization reached out about developing guidelines for healthy media consumption among young people. Meanwhile, my personal life was evolving in unexpected ways. I'd started dating James Mitchell, a documentary filmmaker who specialized in social justice issues. We'd met during the production of my own documentary, and what began as professional collaboration had slowly developed into something deeper. James understood the pressures of living a public life while trying to create meaningful change. He'd spent years documenting immigration reform, environmental activism, and educational inequality, so he wasn't intimidated by my platform or the attention that came with it. "You know what I love about you?" he said one evening as we walked through Central Park after a quiet dinner. "You never forgot that this was about something bigger than yourself. Sometimes I feel like I got swept up in something I never intended to start," I admitted. "Maybe that's exactly why it worked. You weren't trying to become a symbol. You were just trying to be yourself. That authenticity is what made people listen. Our relationship developed away from the spotlight, but when we made our first public appearance together at a charity gala for eating disorder awareness, the media response was immediate and intense. Fashion magazines wanted to feature us as a couple. Lifestyle blogs analyzed our relationship goals. And suddenly James was dealing with a level of public attention he'd never experienced. "Is this what your life is like all the time?" he asked, after we left a restaurant where paparazzi had been waiting outside. "Pretty much. Does it bother you?" "Not bother exactly, but it makes me understand why you value privacy so much." The balance between public advocacy and private life was something I was still learning to navigate. The more successful my career became, the more people felt entitled to comment on every aspect of my existence. My weight, my relationships, my family dynamics, my political views, everything was fair game for public discussion. But I'd also learned to use that attention strategically. When James and I decided to move in together, we chose to share the news ourselves rather than letting paparazzi break the story. The announcement, made through a simple Instagram post showing us painting our new apartment, became an opportunity to talk about healthy relationships and the importance of supportive partners. "James encourages me to take up space," I wrote, in the caption. "Not just physically, but intellectually, emotionally, creatively. That's what love should do. Make you feel bigger, not smaller." The post received over 4 million likes and thousands of comments from women sharing their own experiences with relationships that either diminished or empowered them. Spring brought news that would change the trajectory of my career once again. Anna Wintour herself called to offer me a position as a contributing editor at American Vogue, focusing specifically on diversity and inclusion initiatives. "The industry has changed dramatically in the past few years," she said during our lunch, meeting at her favorite Manhattan restaurant. But we need people in leadership positions who understand that this isn't just about checking boxes. It's about fundamentally shifting how we define beauty and style. The role would allow me to influence editorial decisions at the highest level, to champion photographers and models who brought fresh perspectives, and to shape conversations that reached millions of readers worldwide. There's one condition, Anna continued. We want you to continue modeling as well. Your presence in our pages, both as an editor and as a subject, sends a powerful message about who belongs in fashion. Accepting the position meant stepping into a new level of responsibility and visibility. I would be one of the youngest contributing editors in the magazine's history, and certainly one of the first to have walked the path from model to influencer to industry leader. My first major project in the new role was a special issue focused on the future of beauty, featuring models, activists, and changemakers from around the world. We photographed women of all sizes, ages, ethnicities, and abilities, creating a visual manifesto for what fashion would look like when it truly embraced diversity. One of the most powerful shoots featured 3 generations of women from the same family: a grandmother who'd survived internment during World War II, her daughter who'd fought for civil rights in the 1960s, and her granddaughter who was now a leading advocate for disability rights. The photos, taken by David Kim, captured not just their individual beauty, but the strength that connected them across decades of struggle and progress. This is what we should have been doing all along, David said as we reviewed the images. Telling real stories about real people, instead of trying to fit everyone into the same narrow definition of perfection. The issue became one of the best-selling in Vogue's recent history, and more importantly, it sparked conversations in beauty salons, college dorms, and family living rooms around the world. Women posted photos of themselves inspired by the magazine's message, using hashtags like Future of Beauty and Real Women Real Stories. But perhaps the most gratifying response came from an unexpected source. My cousin Brittany, who'd made those comments about SoulCycle classes at Thanksgiving years earlier, reached out with a message that brought me to tears. Madison, I've been following your career, and I wanted to apologize for how I treated you when we were younger. I've been going to therapy to work on my own issues with body image and self-worth, and I realize now that I was projecting my insecurities onto you. You've inspired me to have a healthier relationship with my own body and to raise my kids differently than we were raised. Thank you for showing our family a better way. The healing within my extended family had been gradual but profound. Cousins who'd once made cutting remarks about my appearance were now sharing my magazine covers on social media with proud captions. Aunts who'd suggested I step out of photos were now requesting family pictures specifically to include everyone. The DI transformation was perhaps most visible at my cousin Jake's wedding that summer. Instead of the careful positioning and whispered suggestions that had characterized family photo sessions in the past, the photographer simply arranged us naturally, focusing on capturing genuine joy and connection rather than hiding anyone's perceived flaws. Everyone just relax and be yourselves, the photographer instructed. And for the first time in Morrison family history, we actually did. When the wedding photos arrived a few weeks later, they told the story of a family that had learned to see beauty in authenticity rather than perfection. Every face was smiling genuinely, every pose felt natural, and nobody looked like they were trying to hide or minimize themselves. My grandmother Eleanor, now 87 and still sharp as ever, pulled me aside during the reception. "You know, what you've given this family?" she asked, holding my hand with fingers that had weathered decades of joy and sorrow. "What's that, Grandma?" "Permission to be human. For too many years, we were all trying so hard to look perfect that we forgot how to just be happy." As autumn arrived, I found myself reflecting on how far we'd all traveled from that evening at the beach house, when I'd been excluded from the family portrait. The girl who'd once been told she would ruin the perfect picture had become someone who was helping redefine what perfect could mean. The recognition kept coming in ways that sometimes felt surreal. Harvard Business School invited me to speak about building authentic brands in the digital age. The Smithsonian acquired several of my magazine covers for their collection on American cultural movements. A scholarship fund was established in my name at Fit for students from underrepresented communities pursuing careers in fashion and media. But the moments that mattered most were still the personal ones. Like the evening when Emma, now 5 years old, asked me to help her with a school project about heroes. "I want to write about you, Aunt Maddie," she said, sitting at my kitchen table with her crayons and construction paper. "What makes someone a hero?" I asked her. "They help people feel better about themselves," she said without hesitation. "And they're not scared to be different." As I watched her carefully write, "My Aunt Madison is a hero because she shows girls that they are beautiful, just the way they are," in her precise kindergarten handwriting, I realized that the work I'd thought was about changing the fashion industry had actually been about something much more fundamental, changing how families talk to their children about worth and beauty and possibility. The ripple effects continued, to expand in ways I could never have anticipated. Young women were pursuing careers they'd never considered before, believing for the first time that their voices and perspectives mattered. Parents were having different conversations with their children. Teachers were incorporating discussions about media literacy and self-esteem into their curricula. And somewhere in Phoenix, in a house I'd grown up in, my parents were displaying magazine covers featuring their daughter with the same pride they'd once reserved for my sister's academic achievements. The transformation was complete, but more importantly, it was genuine, rooted in understanding rather than obligation, in growth rather than guilt. Standing in my apartment that night, looking out at the city that had embraced my dreams when my own family couldn't, I understood that this story was bigger than any individual success. It was about what becomes possible when we stop asking people to make themselves smaller and start making space for them to be exactly who they are. The girl who'd been too big for family photos had helped create a world where no child would ever have to hear those words again. And that legacy felt more valuable than any magazine cover, any award, any recognition I could ever receive. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.